Hi, my name is Emily, and today I'm going to be continuing off from my previous video that introduced you how to create the basic skeleton of a web scraper. So if you haven't seen that yet, I recommend watching that first. Otherwise, just to remind you of the problem, we have this util scraper program we're trying to create, and we have created the skeleton for it. So we've gotten the command line arguments into a loop, and we've gotten our file downloaded into our file handle, and right now our main loop is just reading through those lines one by one. But as we can see from what we've downloaded in the previous video, the HTML files that come are quite complicated, and it's not really, you can't really just point to the part of the screen that you want the information like you can with the timetable information on the website. So we need some sort of way of identifying patterns to spot which lines we want to extract and how we actually get those percent full statistics. So what I like to do whenever I'm faced with this problem is again just look back at the rendered version so I can spot which parts of the website I'm actually aiming to look for. So if we search for COMP2041 here, we'll see the first hit is surrounded by a bunch of other course codes that doesn't give us the percent full statistic. So if we see that in the HTML code, it's probably not what we want. The next one is down here in the table. And we can see, oh look, that is a percent full statistic I want. So we know that if we get to the second part where we get a bunch of lecture information and 100%, that's pretty much where we want to start looking very carefully. So let's look back at the HTML file. If we go to the top and I search for COMP2041, the first hit is a bunch of files over here with a bunch of comp course codes in a table. And if you're worried about your HTML, if it's a little bit rough right now, don't worry, just type looking for W3 Schools HTML or some other similar web resource. You don't need to understand HTML fully to do this exercise. You just need to kind of understand what the tags are. And the most important one is really just this table tag. So if you see TR, table, or TH, that just means we're organizing information to a table. There might be rows, which are TR, and TD, which are table data items. So if we look at our comp thing, this is a table row. Each item, like 1UGA2556, those are table data items. And that is reflected over here. So in the first part, we have a bunch of table data items with a bunch of course codes. And looking back at the website, that's probably this area that we have identified as not what we want. The next thing that we search for is in this section, and it looks really complicated, but let's just take a breath and look through the code. Okay, so we see COMP2041 as a name. Afterwards, we see a bunch of lec 1UGA %sign. So that's a pretty good sign. That's where we want to be. But as we know, we can't just search for COMP2041 because you might have multiple things that come up. So when we searched up COMP2041 the second time, this is what we got. But the first time, up top, we got this line. So we need some sort of way of differentiating the two. And looking at these two lines right now, the thing that jumps out most at me is that we have a class equals CU course in the second line. So with classes is something that HTML and CSS can use to identify different sections. And we know the first section is quite simple. There's no class over there, but I'm going to make the hypothesis that every time I have that table row header, I have a class CU course, and I have my course code that I want in bold. So let's just double check that assumption by searching through our HTML file. So if we search for class equals CU course and we're looking for a name in bold, I get COMP1400, that's good. But I know that I can't just use class equals CU course by itself because the next line also gets highlighted, but that's not a new section. So keep on going. Over here I get COMP1511, that's good. COMP1521, so it seems like that is the pattern I want in my regex. So the first thing I want to do is identify, I want to just skip past all of the lines until I get to COMP2041, because that's the section that actually makes sense to us. We want to get to COMP2041 and then get to this %sign. So everything before that and everything after, I don't care about. So in our while loop, we want to identify where that is. So if our line has class equals CU course, which is what we identified as being part of what we want, but we also need it to have the course code in B, and the course code is in our variable course. So if it has those two things, that means we are in the right section. So we want to set some sort of flag variable for that. Let's call it found. So outside the loop, let's just say found equals 0. When we're inside, set found equal to 1. And if that's the case, that means we're in the right section. And we know that from there, we need to look for all the 100% or whatever percent signs that are on the same line as a lec. But looking at this, we also be careful because some lectures might be closed, and that might give us false hopes that we might be able to get into COMP2041 when it's actually a closed lecture stream and there's actually no space. And if we scroll down a little bit, you'll also see that lectures sometimes come after labs. So we can't just say it's the first few rows of table data because lectures might be at the end and it might actually be scattered everywhere. So that's not standardized, so we can't make that assumption. The only thing we can make is that it's going to have a lec on that line. It won't have a closed, and it'll have some sort of percent sign. So let's confirm that with our code. So we go back to our COMP2041 section. So COMP2041, get to the second one. We see that that's our line that we've used to flag we are in the right section. Afterwards, we want to keep on looking, and the lines that have the information we want look like this. They have a lec. They don't have any closed words on that line. And it has a percent sign to say what percent capacity that we're at. And if we look at the next one, in this case there's a lec, but there is a closed. So we want to make sure our regex does not include those cases, and those percent signs we also don't care about. So looking at this, I have my idea of what I need in my regex. Let's write it. So in our loop, if we are past our found section, so we've passed that critical line, what that tells us we're in the right place, we need to see if the line has lec, all in capitals, spelled just like that, and we need to make sure it doesn't have closed. And if it doesn't have closed, the last thing we need is, does it actually have that percent sign that we're looking for? So we need to see if line has some numbers, so one or more digits attached to a percent sign. So that's what we're looking for. That means we found the percent full line. And if that's the case, we can extract that percent full. And we can do that again with regex. We want that 0 to 9 plus percent, but we want to capture those numbers without the percent sign. So let's put our parentheses like that. That's our percent full. And looking back at our prompt, we want to output the course code lecture is how many percent full. So to format that print statement, we need print our course code lecture is pers full, percent full. That's what we want to be printing out. That seems to be all right, but let's test it out. So we use our util scraper. Let's just use one course code for now to simplify things. Oh no, we have a bunch of weird output over here. So right now we've always got 1% full, but we probably want 100% full. What's going on here? So let's try adding some extra parentheses. Over here, we want our line to match when we have one or more digits percent. So let's try that again, see if we get something comprehensible. So we needed those parentheses to wrap it. However, looking at this, we apparently have a lot of COMP2041 lectures when we can see from our website that there are only 2 full ones. So we only ever want to match 2, which are both 100%. What's going on here? So if we look at our HTML document, we can see, okay, let's look for lec. Those are all lecture streams I want to match, but if I keep on going, I'll actually go into some other lecture streams. But this lecture stream is actually for a different course. So we have specified when we are in the critical section that we want to be looking for lecture streams, but we didn't specify when we should stop looking. So that's an extra if statement we have to add. And let's just see when should we actually stop looking. So when we want to stop looking, that means we want to be pass this critical line over here, and then we keep on scrolling, and we want to get to the next critical line for the next course code. So if we keep on scrolling, we want to get to, so this is microprocessors, and then again, we have a class equals CU course with a different course code, COMP2041. So we know that we're in a different section when we're identifying class equals CU course, because we said that's how we identify the big header rows, but it has another course code, which is not COMP2041. So back in our regex, we can add another case. So in our case, we want to say, okay, if we are in our critical section, but we see the same class equals CU course, and there's a course code in bold. So it's some random course code. It's not the one we're looking for. So 4 capital letters, 4 digits. If we see that, then that means we are in a different section. And if we're in a different section, we have already gotten all the information we need. So we can just simply break out of this while loop using the last command. So hopefully that fixes our problem. Let's give it a try. COMP2041. So we have an uninitialized pattern and match on line 24. So let's look at line 24. If found is 1, if line is equal to class CU course, and we didn't specify the line here. So line, and then we have that pattern that we're looking for. Let's try it again. So there, we only have 2 lines, which is what we expect. So that's so far so good. Let's compare it with the output we've said is supposed to be correct. So if we have util scraper and we put psych1011, COMP1511, COMP2041, econ1102, we get the output that we expect. So that's pretty good. Our program is working well. So the big takeaways is, first, look at the timetable, the class util website, to figure out what the pattern is in a format you're familiar with. Then look at the HTML file and see how do you differentiate lines of code that look similar, but you'd only want one of them. So looking for patterns and seeing what differentiates them. Then it's simply a translation exercise into Perl, and then make sure you test to get rid of bugs. So that's your basic web scraper. I hope you've learned a lot. However, there is room for improvement. So if you want to see how to extend this using options for printing out different statistics, watch my next video. Otherwise, I hope you had learned a lot from these videos.